screen share here.
So you're going live right now?
Yep, setting it up. So.
All right. I just posted my Zoom link simultaneously. So.
All right, see if we're live here.
Looks like it.
All right, cool. Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday. Jeff Kamke here on Better Abundance Facebook group page. I'm joined here with my good friend and colleague, Jeff Finley. Want to say hello, Jeff?
Hello, all.
So we're both going to share some really cool information with you guys here today. So we're going to just jump in. We're going to be also simulcasting through Zoom as well. So we will probably take questions at the end and check back and see if anybody's got any questions or anything like this. This will be about 90 minutes to 2 hours, we're guessing. So be filled with a lot of really wonderful, great content for you. So let's jump in here. I'm going to move my screen out of the way. All right, so I'm going to record it. Almost went ahead without doing that. And then I think we're ready to go. All right. So we're going to talk about today, guys, is really the full content, the full solution of things that we've posted. Both Jeff and I both have separate Facebook groups and pages, and we post content on there, and we're going to go into the full-blown. Many of you have commented or said, you know, give us more info. Well, here's more info. So we're going to show you how to give your money 3 jobs, reuse your money more than once, and some other information today. So this is somebody that both of us know, and he has heard this information from us in the past, and just wanted to give you a quick 30 seconds of what he learned, and this will kind of set the expectation of what you're going to learn today.
Again, just wanted to say thank you for showing us the private banking concept that you guys are teaching. It really opened up my eyes to different avenues of creating wealth and protecting that wealth and transferring that wealth to future generations. Amazing concept that we're using and getting some amazing results. So thank you. I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart, and future generations will be greatly affected by this whole concept. So thanks again, Jeff.
So we'll get into a little bit about Jeff and I. Many of you do know me, or a couple of you might know Jeff as well. That way you kind of know who we are, where we're coming from. And my story kind of begins, if you can see this picture here, I had a lot of very severe acne back, started in 5th grade and went through high school, and went through some really challenging times with that. And if any of you have ever dealt with anything like that, it's not fun. You can kind of tell the expression on my face was, I was not real pleased to be seen or even have my picture taken. So that was a rough little stretch there. Very much a character building time, and, you know, had a lot of negative things come from that, but also ultimately catalyzed into a lot of positive things that have come from that, and help shape, you know, who I am today, and the things that I do, and the things that I know, and the things that I can help share, like this information today. I think ultimately goes back to the reason I found where I'm at today, and the information we're sharing in this webinar is because of the acne. So ultimately you got to look at the things in your life and have thankfulness and gratitude for those trials and tribulations, because they're there to make you stronger. So I know both Jeff and I have dealt with this. I'll explain mine real quick, and then Jeff can tell you a little bit about his journey. I've primarily been in the lawn and landscape industry since I was 13 years old, and had a couple different businesses. Bought a business when I was, he would have been 20 or 21, I think. So I've done all that, and I shifted gears back a number of years ago, and it was shortly after a big shakeup in our family, which I'll share as one of the last things that we went through, an accident that many of you know we went through. And we ultimately moved, and I was just trying to start a new business, doing all that, and I just never put into that business all that I needed to in order to get it going off the ground. It was a natural health and personal development business. and ultimately had to kind of put that on the back burner for now and get back into some other things that does provide for a family and pay the bills. So that's a little bit about my story. What about you, Jeff? What are some of the experiences you've had with life?
Well, we could probably take this a lot longer than 90 minutes if we
Right.
wanted to go down all those bunny trails. But yeah, so that's actually me on the table in this picture. So it's a great example for both of us. So we had some very similar paths at that time frame, and I would say that my story in regards to the business aspect is very similar. I've had actually several attempts at some sort of a side business, or even taking what was side business full time several years back. And same as Jeff shared, that just on one hand didn't put in what I needed to make them succeed. On the other hand, I think probably wasn't allowed to succeed to some degree because it wasn't what ultimately was my calling or what I was meant to pursue. So while some of us could look at those as quote unquote failures, right? I think they're just stepping stones to get to where our passion ultimately lies and where we can make the biggest difference for people.
Awesome. Well, I know I'll let you kind of carry on with the next one as well, because we both have had college experience, or well, lack thereof, I guess, is what I'm going to say. So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that.
So one of the scenarios in my life, I guess, in the past was a decade ago, a little plus, when we experienced the recession in 2008 timeframe. I lost my job at the time. And I never thought really prior to that my not having a college education would hurt me, because the things that I had pursued and wanted to pursue really wouldn't necessitate having that degree or that experience. But I did find in that time frame it was an interesting phenomenon, because my background had some professional experience. I'd been in financial services, I'd done some real estate investing, and so some of the factories that I was applying at that time, because that was kind of the bulk of my experience, didn't want me after they looked at my resume, because I had some professional experience and they thought I was overqualified. But then other places where, maybe in my mind, I was more qualified for maybe something like a customer service role or something along those lines. They didn't want me because I didn't have a degree. So I found myself kind of stuck in this odd place in the middle of being overqualified yet underqualified, in some cases maybe even for the same company but two different roles. So yeah, that's kind of my experience with college, or the lack thereof, as you mentioned. But I'm thankful that I've continued to find the paths that suit me better and don't necessitate that anyway. So if
Yep.
you're somebody that has experienced problems because of not having a college education, don't worry. There's paths out there where you can succeed just fine without that.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and for me, I actually was a college dropout when I started thinking about transitioning careers out of the landscape industry into natural health. This was one of the first decisions I made. I paid for the entire course up front, and I don't even think I completed the first semester. How dumb was that I put, I think, $5,000 into that and never did anything with it. But it was kind of like you mentioned a minute ago, Jeff. It wasn't really in line with what I wanted and where I was going, and it just one of those clarifying steps in life that you have to. I don't like to use the word failure, but you make a step that you think is the right decision. You find out no, it wasn't, and then that helps you clarify further and go further down the line and get to where you're ultimately going. So, but for me, I can say I was a college dropout. I never have completed college. Even now, I found other certification courses and things that I found to be far superior to anything a college was going to teach me. So this is something I haven't experienced. Jeff, why don't you share about your experience here?
Well, and to that point, I would not wish it on anyone. So I'm glad to hear that. But back in 1995, in my high school years, we did have a house fire that stemmed from an issue with the furnace. It's interesting to me, and I don't think there's any way to necessarily go back and prove anything at this point or whatever, but it was a week after the furnace company had come in and serviced it, where it malfunctioned. So interesting that there may be a connection there, but yeah, so this is me, picture of me, as devastating and surprising as that whole experience was. You do see a smile on my face in that picture. That's because the irony, or the comic relief, if you will, of the situation was that everything in my bedroom was ruined, basically, either through the fire damage or the smoke damage, or a lot of the stuff you wouldn't necessarily think of actually gets ruined by water when they're putting out the fire. So pretty much everything in my room was toast, with the exception of my calculus textbook from my calculus class. The single class in high school that I loathed and did not do well in. So when we found that, we decided we needed to record that moment, and I had a smile on my face for that reason. Like, are you kidding? But yeah, the experience was definitely a challenging one, and again, experienced some great positives through that, but still would not wish that on anyone.
Absolutely. Well, and speaking of don't wish it on anybody, this is something that we went through back in, beginning of 2014. Many of you do know this, that know me personally. We were involved in a car accident. We were hit on foot by a car down in Florida. And this was definitely a big turning point in our life. And we knew that when it happened. We knew because kind of what we were asking for just kind of came in a different wrapped gift than we were thinking. So has caused a lot of, stress and turmoil and, a lot of trauma physically, emotionally, mentally. But what it has done for us is put us in a situation, and many of you can probably relate to this, where you get knocked down and you're looking for answers, you're looking for solutions, and they don't seem readily available to you based on what's out there, what your friends or family may know or point you to. And you kind of think there's got to be something better out there. And ultimately, where the information we're presenting to you today, I was searching for this ultimately because we got hit by that car. And if it weren't for that, I don't think I would have stumbled upon this information that, we're going to share with you today, that I've implemented in my life for the last couple of years. And, so it's really a blessing in disguise, as are many of these things. I know, quick side note, when I have dealt with clients in my natural health business, when I had that, a lot of people have these issues and they get stuck on the trauma, and they never do look for the gold nuggets in them. And there's gold nuggets in everything if you look for them. And so I'd encourage you, if you've gone through anything similar to what we've gone through, this isn't the message today, but I always like to encourage people, because everybody's gone through stuff even far worse than what we've gone through. And, there's still gold nuggets littered in there to help you grow and get better at what you're here to do. So.
Well, and if I can interject real quick, Jeff, let me just say, for those that don't know you or don't know that piece particular of your story real well, I'm just grateful as a good friend that you guys are still here, because I remember fielding that phone call from your father, and I still remember the pit in my stomach, that thinking that maybe you guys were gone. And so yeah. Glad that not only that you guys survived that okay, but that you've been able to pick up those gold nuggets and transfer that into value for others through this process.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So as we're going through an interesting time right now in the world with the coronavirus, and we're kind of a couple months into it by now, I guess, or a month and a half into it, I don't know official dates, but this is something that we're all dealing with, and we're all wearing our masks, or many of us are. We've had a lot of economic uncertainty right now. Stock markets are way down. I know a few people that are nearing retirement that are a little anxious right now, not knowing what's going to happen. And even for the next, who knows, another 5 or 10 years out, we still may be seeing the repercussions of what's going on right now and the decisions that have been made. And, not here to get into what those decisions are, good or bad, but the result of it is we have a lot of unknowingness and uncertainty around money right now. And this is a great time to share the content we're sharing with you today, because this can be a solution so that if something like this happens in the future, if you are experiencing any sort of uncertainty or stress around money right now, what you learn today can set you up for the next time there's uncertainty around money with the economy or in the world. You can hopefully be in a lot better place with the information you learn today if you apply it. So, this is something that I know a lot of people are worried about as well, is taking care of their family. Can you provide? And if you're not making money, if you're forced not to work, in my primary company, my landscaping company, we weren't able to work for a month. So, there was no income coming in for a month. And there's a lot of people that still aren't back to work, haircut people and salons and all that kind of stuff, still can't go. So what do you do? What kind of things can you put into place so that this won't happen to you again? Or if it does, it won't, be as bad. And those are some of the things we're going to get into today. So if we're not talking about just the pandemic, I think is a general conversation, though, most people are having some sort of financial struggle. A lot of people are living paycheck. I know I have. I'm sure you have, right, Jeff? we've
Absolutely.
both experienced, money that as we provide for family and have cars that break down and do different things. Money gets tight, and sometimes we get behind the 8 ball, and it's hard to get our way out. And you might feel like this lady here in the animated picture, where you just feel like you're on the financial hamster wheel, and maybe you're just working longer hours, maybe you're working a second job. This is something we've experienced and seen firsthand, is your time away from family. If you're having to work more, your family begins to suffer, your marriage begins to suffer, your kids might start acting out, your health might start declining. And, I don't know about you, Jeff, but when I have experienced those things, they're not fun. And if there's a way to not go through that, I would like to know about it. Right? Are you with me on that?
Yep, I'll give that an amen.
Yeah. So, that's where a lot of people are. And, not many people know what to do to get out of that. So, not that we're here to be financial coaches, but we are going to share with you here in the coming minutes a philosophy, a concept, a way of using your money and thinking about your money that will help you with these kind of things, feeling stuck on a financial hamster wheel. You'll be able to get off that financial hamster wheel and move forward in life. So we want to take you to a place of feeling security, confidence, excitement, enjoying the money that you have, and being able to spend it and save it and not sacrifice either one of those. That's really what we're going to start achieving for you today, is giving you some of the information about how to shift where you're at. And depending on where you're at, and I've been there, I know you've been there as well, Jeff, where you might be in your situation, you think there is no way on God's green earth that I'm going to change my situation enough to where I can feel good about finances. But it's possible. I've done it in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, before I learned this information from my accountant, I was probably like many of you. I felt stuck. I felt like I'm never going to get out of the debt that we had from our accident. I felt like I'm just working and never getting anywhere. I've been there. I felt that. I know you've probably felt the exact same way too, Jeff, that you just don't feel like there's any light at the end of the tunnel. And
yeah, and it's amazing as you hit on that, how much of that resides in the 6 inches up here. And regardless of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, it's where we allow our mind to go, that shapes really that experience and how long we hang out in that experience. So more on that, some other time. That's not what we're necessarily here to talk about today. But yeah.
We're going to kind of touch a little bit on the mental part of it, more about how we view and use money, not so much on the financial blocks or, how we get thinking about our money situation, how we can change that. I definitely would like to put more content that you and I know both know and can, help people in that regard, but that is not what we're going to talk about today. Although it is a very fun topic and a very fascinating topic and a very empowering topic. We'll have to do that another time. So there's really 3 takeaways here. Jeff, do you want to go through these and share with everybody what we're going to cover today?
Yeah, so the 3 things that we're going to cover today are first, relearning some of what we think we may have learned about money, because as we'll see, there's a lot of things that we may have been taught or have learned growing up that may not necessarily be complete reality, or may not be the best reality for us. So we're going to relearn. We're also going to learn to reuse our money. So I think, if any of you have caught any of our Facebook lives or kind of promo for this, or even the title, we're talking about giving our money 3 jobs. So we're going to be talking about how we do more than one thing with money and use it more than once. And then lastly, we'll be talking about retaining money, not just for ourselves in the here and now, but also generationally with our family tree. So we hope that by the time we get done with this presentation today, that you will have a confident paradigm shift in all 3 of these areas.
Yep, I definitely know you will. So the first thing really is, I've already kind of touched on it, is relearning how you view and use money, because there are the wealthy that are trained differently about money than the middle class or the poor class. There's different education that goes on, conversations sitting around the dinner table, and the experiences that your family goes through are completely differently. There's also people in the know. And I've met several of these people that are not what you would consider wealthy. They're just middle class or upper middle class people. They might make 6 figures or so, and they've implemented these things before I knew about it. I thought I might be the first person, but I wasn't. And that was pretty cool to find out that more people than I realized have learned about this, a few years prior to me learning about it. And it's cool that there are people in the know. So you're going to now, after this webinar, become one of those people in the know, and you're going to know what to do to implement these things so you can view and use money differently. Because it's not what you know about money that is the problem. It's what you think you know that just isn't so. There's a lot of things that we do that we've been told to do. This is what you should do if you get a lump sum payout from a family member passing. This is the best thing to do with that money. If you are young and you're a young family and you want to put money away for retirement, this is the best step you should take. There's a lot of things that we're told to do that when you look at them, if you take a step back and look at them and you go, what's going on here? They don't make a whole lot of sense as to why we're doing them. But we're only told so many options to do, and we're taking our best pick of those available options without knowing that there's other options that have never been told to you. So what we're going to be telling you today are the rest of your options, and they're going to look a lot better, trust me. You've ever thought this? I know I've thought this. I don't know if you've thought this, Jeff, but why do the rich keep getting richer and making more money, and why do the poor keep getting poorer and having financial struggles? What do you think the answer is to that, Jeff?
Well, like you said in the previous slide, well, if I can rephrase a little bit, it's hard to make an informed decision when you don't have all the information. So the reason is that they do have information that we don't. And not only that, but if you've heard the phrase before that knowledge is power, that's actually not true, because you can know a lot of things and not do anything with that information. So the phrase that I relearned with that thought process is that applied knowledge is power. So not only do they have that information, but they've put it into practice.
Absolutely.
So with Parkinson's law, what that states is that work expands to fulfill or fill the time available for its completion. So being a pretty much lifelong procrastinator, I can certainly relate with this one. That's something I'm continually working on in myself to get better. But I think for anybody that can relate with that, you'll certainly understand this. If you get given a May 31st deadline for a project, but you have known about it for 6 weeks, probably most of the work on that's going to take place in like the last 3 days right before May 31st, and you might be cramming, staying up late the night before to get it done. So we see that lived out in our lives on a regular basis. But that same concept applies with our money. So if we don't have a plan for our money, but we do experience an increase, it'll get eaten up quickly. And there's actually a good analogy for that we've got here, that when you think about flying somewhere, it's easy to experience normally being in coach and upgrading to first class. It's easy to make that move, right? But then once you've experienced first class, it's a lot harder to go back to sitting in coach. Another similar example is that we've had lots of vehicles over the time of our marriage, right? But just recently here, 8 months or so ago, we got a new vehicle, new used, and it's the first one that we've had that has heated seats. And living in Michigan, where we experience a good deal of cold, I think it's probably the last time that we will not have a vehicle with heated seats. The second vehicle that we have that doesn't, because it's nice on those cold winter days. Just go out there and hit a button and have a seat warm up for you. So yeah,
Yeah, it's interesting
definitely
how our
reality.
this plays into how we think about money and use money, because this law is going on in the background, whether we realize it or not, and it plays a interesting role in if we are working more hours or we pick up that second job to try to get ahead. This is why a lot of times we can't get ahead, even though we're making more money, is because we don't have an exact plan and know what to do with the extra money or even the money that we're making to leverage it so that you're maximizing it. And that's what we're going to begin showing you today, is that plan, those steps, the process that you can begin to shift into, so that the money that is flowing into your life, you can do more things with it and it will get you to where you want to go faster. That's really the whole goal here. So this is, over the experience of my life and the things that we talked about early on in those first few slides with acne and different things, and as I've been an entrepreneur pretty much since I was 13 years old, experienced a lot of different things with that. And I've always looked at the advice I was given around money and different things like that didn't quite add up to me. And I don't know if you feel like that, Jeff. Have you felt like that before, where just things you were told just didn't quite add up to you?
I have.
So I felt like that. And these are some of the highlights that, I think we both agree on most of these things that we've realized over the years. And you'll probably feel like you resonate with these as well, that, when I've been given financial advice around retirement, and I remember one guy that I was probably just out of high school. I think it was a friend of my dad's or somebody, but he sold Roth IRAs, and he was just pushing me to put, I don't even remember the dollar amount, into a Roth IRA, and I would have X number of $1 million by the time I was 65. And it sounded really, really good, but it didn't quite add up to me. So there's a lot of things that are parking your money somewhere and crossing your fingers, and that just never resonated with me for whatever reason. I didn't know back then why, but now I know why it didn't resonate with me. And we had to do this after our accident. We had no choice but to cut our expenses. We no longer went out and got our hair cut. There was several Christmases that my wife and I didn't buy Christmas gifts for each other, or really anybody in the family. We just didn't have the money for that stuff. And so you do have to cut back at times, but it's not a way to live long term. There's books out there that say, you can be a millionaire if you live like a pauper your whole life and accumulate all this money. Well, yeah, you can have a big bank account, but you're miserable. And what's the point? I don't agree with that either. And this is something we saw. I'll touch on this at the very end, but unfortunately, my father-in-law, my wife's dad, passed away last November, actually 6 months ago yesterday. And I firmly believe one of the reasons that his body began to shut down was because he worked so hard. He was a very hard worker, which is an admirable trait. But in today's society, it's become this norm to work 100 hours a week. And that is gone. It shifted the balance between being an admirable trait and working hard for your money and providing for your family to having an adverse effect on your health. And I just am not at a place to where I've done that before, and even a little bit now where I work longer hours. I know you do the same thing, Jeff, and your health struggles, and then it's just not worth it at the end of the day. So aren't there something better we can do? I already kind of touched on getting a job, and I'll let you handle from here on this one, Jeff. But, I know personally many financial advisors, and a lot of things that they suggest and recommend for whatever reason never resonate with me either. And maybe you can explain why on this slide, because to me, there has to be a better way.
Well, and you touched on it, with the advice that you were given as a young man to fund that Roth IRA and leave that money there for decades, and hopefully have this big pile at the end. If you look at, the people that followed that type of a plan and then went to retire in 2008, or even, in the last couple months here, I think that plays into why we don't necessarily want to risk our money just leaving it in the markets. And so even if our advisor or the company that we're doing business with in a capacity like that is telling us that we're doing great, unfortunately, one of the things that we've learned is they're allowed to maybe give us numbers that wouldn't be what they seem. So looking at this slide, if we follow that first row across, if we put $1,000 in to an IRA or 401k or whatever the vehicle is, and we get a 20%, a real 20% return on the first year and a 20% return on the second year. We average those 2 years, we come out with 20%, right? And we end up with a $1,440 balance. That would be, wouldn't that be what you'd expect as an average 20% return, Jeff?
It would be in my mind. I'm not super great at math anymore, but that would be what I would expect. Yes.
So then if we follow that down to that next row, what we have found is that if you get a 60% return in year one, but lose 20% in the second year, because it's still a 40% over the 2 years, it still averages out to 20% theoretically, but that balance now is 1,280 rather than 1,440. So you're still being told that you got 20%, but the balance is different. So then if we follow that down the next couple rows, 100 first year, negative 60 the second, you end up with a smaller amount than what you put in, but you still average 20%. Now, I'm not sure, I'm a pretty common sense kind of guy. But you tell me that I've averaged a 20% gain and my account balance is smaller than what I put in. That doesn't quite compute up here. So then the last row, the most ridiculous example is 140% return the first year, but you lose it all the second year. You still got an average 20% return, but you now have nothing. So again, I think what some of these people that have retired, unfortunately, in these tough times have found is that what they believed that they've been getting as far as returns all this time in the market really aren't reality.
So with what you're saying here, Jeff, this is legal for, financial institutions to publish this data and mislead their customers to some level. I mean, it's, I think, well documented, isn't it, that this kind of goes on?
Right. And, from a math perspective, if you look at 60 and subtract 20, it's 40 and you divide that by 2. And yeah, the math seems to support maybe being a 20% average. But with the losses taking place in the second year, the effect that it has on the actual balance is unfortunately not supportive of what you would think of as a true 20% average. And unfortunately, they are allowed to tell you that.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I know one of the books I've read, Tony Robbins' book, Master Money, the Game. And I know he talks extensively about some of the laws that are perfectly okay for them to do, where we're like this example, what we think is going on and what's truly going on are two different things. And they're using some word games and a little bit of some tricky marketing and stuff to get you to think one thing and then have another thing happen that's not always in your best interest. And I think, this kind of example is part of why years ago when I was approached to do like a Roth IRA, I think this is kind of the stuff that now as I know it, I'm like, oh, that's probably why I was, never resonated with it, because I guess just innately I sense something going on. So,
and I want to say too that, I've got a couple friends that are financial advisors, especially as of the last year or so. And, so if you guys are watching or anybody else, that has a financial advisor that they love and trust, this is not a reflection on your advisor or the person that's trying to help you. Their interest, I'm sure, is genuine and such. But the truth is the industry at large is allowed to get away with what I would call manipulation of those facts. And so we just want to make that a point. Yes. We want to educate.
Yep. Yeah. Not trying to down anybody in particular. It's just a matter of you need to know what's going on so you can make good decisions, because this is how you're using money and you think it's one way and you're not going to get the results you think you're going to get, potentially anyway. Because I do know some people that have had wonderful financial advisors and they've helped them the best they can with the tools they have available, but they only have a certain number of tools in their toolbox. And this is a tool that very, very few of them have in their toolbox that we're sharing with you today. So all that to say, for me, it came down to there's got to be some criteria. And until I learned this information a couple years ago, I never really had compiled it. But then I started realizing, down through the years when I experienced different things through different parts of life, and I was kind of almost looking for this, but I never found it until a couple years ago. And so one of them is, I don't want to scrimp and save and sacrifice my money now and live, miserably essentially, so that I can have this big lump of cash at the end. That doesn't resonate with me. I want to enjoy my money now. I've had newer vehicles. I've had Sea-Doo jet skis, and, I enjoy those things. I want to make good money, but also enjoy it without sacrificing the end. And that's something that we're going to learn today. And I want my money to go up every year. I don't want to have to, because I spent money today on something to enjoy my money, now I'm going to have less in retirement. And this is one of the ways, as we've hinted, you can give your money multiple jobs. We'll go into more on this in a few minutes. And I have 2 children. What do you have, Jeff?
Yeah, we have 2 children as well.
Yep. And so I think we're congruent, and we want to teach our children the things that we're learning here and implementing in our life and helping other people implement in their life so that they can grow up viewing and using money in a better way than they've been taught by the rest of the world. Because you can learn to grow money, you can learn to acquire money, but it doesn't have to have a negative effect on their personality, their character, their decisions, their habits. They can be good people in society, contribute without having an entitlement mentality because they got handed, $1 million or something that spoils them and ruins them. There's ways to teach, and that's part of, kind of everything that we've learned and are going to be teaching today. So, and this is kind of one of my personal quotes. There's a lot of conflict out there about the wealthy, and we're kind of trained to view them badly. And I know several people that make what would be considered very good money into the 6-7 figure range. I know them personally. And many of them have told me they have to put more effort into their thoughts and their day-to-day life to stay at like middle class level than they do at the wealthier level. So I've heard enough people say that it's like, well, instead of downing the wealthy, why don't we all just raise our economies up, our personal economies? And why can't we all be living in mansions and driving nice cars? Why can't we all just do that? It seems easier to me. And the information we're going to share today is going to kind of help you get there if that's a desire you have. If you don't have a desire for a mansion or BMW, that's totally cool. But, it's interesting. We're not going to get into a big spiritual discussion here, but I think you and I, Jeff, agree that we believe God made us for a reason. We're here for a purpose. We're here to carry out that purpose. And whether you like money or not, money is a necessary tool that if you have more money, you can carry out your purpose maybe on a wider scale or a bigger scope or impact more people. And when we are talking about money like we are today, we want your money goals to be aligned with your purpose. We want the information you're going to learn today about how to use money differently and reuse it multiple times to be in alignment with who you are, the person you were created to be, so that you can use these things for good in the world, because we need more people with more financial power exercising their purpose and passion in this world to make the world a better place. That's a very strong conviction I have. How do you feel about that, Jeff?
This has been a bit of an evolution for me in my thinking, and kind of revolving back to what I said earlier about it's amazing how much of it is in your mind. So, as growing up and experiencing a lot of financial lack, and from my perception at least, to some of the struggles that we've had in our marriage financially, there's been a lot of times where I've gotten to the point where I've even verbalized, I hate money.
Yeah, you do.
Because I see the problems that get created by not having it, right? And so that, and there's a lot of people too that come from the spot where you talked about moments ago, where they would view the people that have a lot of money as evil, right? So therefore, money must be bad. But I graduated, if you will, to a place of, money is just a tool, and it can be used for good or bad. And I think probably I've spent the last decade or so kind of in that space. But then even more recently, again, not to make this a sermon or anything, but the first time that God talks about currency in the Bible, he's talking about it as gold, and he calls the gold good.
Yep.
So actually the truth is that money is good. It was created that way. So if we can tap into that and follow the principles that allow us to have more of it and utilize that for the good that it's intended to be used for, I think that's where we want to be.
I agree. So let's jump in here to the second concept that we're going to teach you here today. And this is going to get into more of the nuts and bolts about how this actually works instead of just prefacing you with some mindset things. But we want to teach you how to reuse your money more than once. And something it's been, a few books have been written about this with this title, or talk about where you spend your way to wealth, which is kind of a different way of thinking about money, that you can actually spend your money and buy things and it actually adds to your wealth. And that's what we're going to teach you today, because it is absolutely true. It's not far-fetched. It's not a scam. It's not an investment. It's nothing goofy. It's just a process, a concept, a way of funneling the money that comes through your life and handling it different. And that's what we're going to start talking to you about here. So Jeff, you want to kind of talk to us about some of the different ways we can handle money and lead us into some of these concepts?
Yeah. So growing up, again, we're experiencing what probably most Americans would experience, where, I still remember a time actually when I was younger where I was on a car ride with my dad, and we happened to drive by a car lot, and, he kind of saw a car that he liked and, kind of hit the brakes and did a U-turn, and we went back, and long story short, we ended up getting that car. It was just a split second, hey, that looks sharp, and but the process that followed is probably the one that most of us are familiar with, where man, that car looks nice, but I don't have X amount of dollars to just walk in there and write a check or hand them cash for that car. So we go to the bank and we do our best to prove ourselves worthy of borrowing maybe even our own, but certainly other people's collective money that they're controlling, and have terms that we're responsible for paying that back to them on, right? So that's the scenario that I think most of us experience when we want to make a purchase, is that we don't have the sufficient amount of cash laying around, so we end up getting into the borrower scenario, and that's how we live our lives with vehicles and houses, certainly, where we're taking out multi-year loans in some form or fashion. But then, a lot of times, we go back to the Parkinson's law conversation. There's times where we have more month than money at the end of the month, and so we may resort to borrowing on credit cards, and now we over leverage ourselves, and that's really more of an in-depth conversation. But at a simple level, most of us are in a place where we don't have the cash available to make the purchases that we want or need for our lifestyle. So borrower is where we live.
Yep. And I think this is part of what in society at large, we're trained now to do this. I think,
Absolutely.
My grandparents weren't taught this, but since then it's crept in more and more and more, where now it's just accepted. You want to go to college, you get a loan. You want to buy a house, you go get a loan. You want to buy that new car. Well, does it fit your monthly budget? And that's the question. That's the mindset that everybody has, is if you can make the monthly payment, go do it. Borrow the money. And that's something that outside of the United States, other countries don't function that way. Historically, our ancestors didn't function that way, but it's to the advantage of the banks, and we become a slave essentially to the financial industry, and we're stuck on that hamster wheel, and it's not the greatest place to be. So
Yeah,
let's,
even though I think most of us, when we go to sign our mortgage and sit there for a half an hour signing a pile of papers, right? Uh, we see the truth in lending statement, and we acknowledge with our signature that to buy $100,000 house, we're going to pay them $250,000. We acknowledge that we're going to send them an extra $150,000 of interest because,
right.
well, that's what I know, and I can afford the payment, and I want this house, right?
Yep.
So, yeah.
I know I didn't put this in the slides, but I know in other presentations we've done, we talk about it. It's the volume of interest, and I always joke about, I've walked into banks, I'm sure you've done this too, where they'll, somewhere on display in the bank, there'll be like a little chart or hanging on the wall, talk about that day's like mortgage rate. And it's, this real small number, 2, 3, 4, 5%. And it seems insignificant. But if they actually put up on a billboard or on a sign inside the bank that said, hey, you want $100,000 house? Great, come on in and get a loan because it's going to cost you $225,000. If they actually advertise the volume of interest, which it becomes in most cases well over 100%. You buy $100,000 house, you're spending over $100,000 just in interest.
Yep.
To have that. And that's, if we were marketed to that way, most of us would start scratching our head thinking that doesn't seem like a great thing for me. Why would I spend, buy a house and pay double for it? Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But when we're told it's just 3%, Jeff, no big deal. Seems insignificant. I'll go 3% is a great interest rate. Yeah, it is. And this is a little bit of the flow of money that, we all do. This is the graphic example of what Jeff just described, that we run to our bank or credit union and say, I need to buy XYZ, and they give us the loan, and we spend months or years or decades in payment back. What else can we do?
So the second option, I've talked to some other people that had a different experience growing up, where they maybe that generational thing from a couple generations ago did pass along and sustained with the family, where they say, a better way is to build that pile of money up first, and then don't make that payment, or don't make that purchase rather than until you have that amount of cash to be able to write the check. So in both examples, though, what we see, and I think we'd all acknowledge, right, Jeff, that this is a better option.
Is by far a better option. A lot less stress and a lot less being on the financial hamster wheel.
Right. That said, what we see as the common denominator in both scenarios is that in the borrower example, we start at what we call even, whether that's 0 or 10 grand in the bank or whatever, and we make that purchase via the loan, and then we pay that back up that stairway back up to even. So we really never get back, or we never really get above even in that scenario, right? Because we're always diving back down to take the loan and pay it back up, and repeating that process. But then when we graduate to the saver example, we kind of flip that on its head, and we save up first, but then what do? We spend it back down to even. So in either case, the common denominator is that at the end of the purchase process, we're at even.
Yep.
There's no gain there. Maybe there's no downside, but there's no gain, right? We're always going back to even, where we started from.
Yep. Yeah, I think Tim, that we were trained by, said it's a very superior way of doing it, but at the end of the day, you're still making payments. It's either going to the bank or to you, or into your savings account, and you're still making purchases. And most people, I know my best friend growing up, his dad was so proud that he saved up for years and paid for a John Deere, utility tractor in cash. It was like $19,000. Like, okay, that's awesome that he did that. I've got family members that are great savers, and those are great, better, far superior concepts to teach your children and practice yourself. Something I need to get better at, quite honestly. But at the end of the day, it's, still the same. So want to go through a little bit about how flow of money works?
Yeah, so if we look at this example, we've got a gallon of paint in a hardware store or something that costs $6 today, right? So, I might, as the hardware store owner, say, well, I know that over time, the value of this can of paint is going to grow. So I'm just going to hang on to it, and we'll wait. And at some point in the future, it's going to be worth a lot more. So I'll sell it at that point and capture what its value is at that point, right? So if I, in 1988, bought this $6 can of paint and just let it sit on the shelf. Customer comes in and says, I need some paint. Oh, no, sorry. I'm going to hold that can of paint. It's going to be worth something to me someday. Hold that for 11 years. In 1999, I know, it seems so crazy, right? But in 1999, if I had sold that can of paint, I could have sold it for $18 and made a $12 profit over 11 years, right? So I'm averaging $1 a year almost of value gain as I let it sit on the shelf collecting dust. So that's one example of what to do with that can of paint. The other is, I know if I sell that right now, I make $8. So I get $2 profit. And I think, how many times can I make that $2 profit? And I turn those cans of paint out as fast as I can. Say I turn a can of paint 10 times a year, I make $20, right? Because I make $2 profit each time. So while the $2 profit doesn't seem like much, and even relative to the $12 profit in that other example, when I create that movement of money, I can create a $20 profit per year. So then if we multiply that, repeat that process and multiply that by that same 11 years, now our value gained on the paint process is $220 over that same time period. And it's the difference between stagnant compounding or the velocity of money, using that money over and over, right?
Yep. And I think this goes back to where we kind of started on that very first principle of relearning or rethinking about how you view and use money, because over here, this is what we're taught is your best option for money. So you're not a borrower, you're a saver. The money that you're saving, you can put a portion of that into some sort of a financial vehicle that allows you to grow the money. And this is what we're taught is the best thing to do. But what you've never been told, or very few people that I've met have even heard of this before, is the motion of money, the velocity of money. And this is one of the key differences to what we've learned and apply in our life and are teaching other people about now, is how to grow your money faster by moving the money. And this is exactly the difference is, a little bit of profit here and there, but if you do that multiple times over, it can add up to a lot of difference. And the cool thing about what we're sharing is we're actually going to provide a solution here that actually incorporates both compounding and the velocity. So we're actually using what Einstein was misquoted as saying is the eighth wonder of the world, and what I have dubbed the ninth wonder of the world. So we're combining the eighth and ninth wonder of the world here in this. And so what's this, Jeff?
So this would be a hybrid of really both scenarios that we already talked about with the borrower and the saver. So we do want to utilize what we agreed on is the better option as far as being the saver, right? We do want to save up a pile of money. But then what we want to do with that is use that pile of money instead of making a single purchase of what ends up becoming maybe a depreciating asset or maybe just a flat out liability. We want to use that money to capitalize our own bank. So now we can put ourselves into a position to go back to that borrower mentality that we talked about earlier, but it benefits us now. And so as you see here in this example, we see that same, taking out a loan and paying it back over time. But what you'll notice as a key difference is it no longer ends in getting back to even. Every time that process repeats, the graph has experienced an increase in the financial status, right?
Mm-hmm. So. Yep, and that's the key. So let's go over a little more better example that'll resonate more with how cash flow goes. You want to go through this, Jeff?
Yeah. So, uh, so right now, if we look at this, as a, this is the spot that we all come from. We deposit some money into a bank, and this may not be typical of for a couple different reasons, which is why I'm chuckling. But let's just say, for hypothetical, this is true. If we deposit $100,000, which most of us don't have because we're following the paths that we've grown up learning, right?
Yep.
But if we put $100,000 into a bank and they give us back 4%, which is the other reason I'm chuckling, because finding a 4% right now in a bank is pretty much unheard of. I think most of the statements I've seen are, 0.01% interest or something silly like that. But let's just say that both of those scenarios are true, and you've got 100 grand and you put it in the bank and they give you back 4%, right? What then happens is what we talked about earlier. We want to go make some of those purchases, right? We want the house, we want the cars, we want to do some work on the house, consolidate some debt, any of these examples. We can go to the bank and ask for our money back, essentially in the form of a loan. And what is pretty much always the common denominator there is that the interest that they're going to charge us to utilize our own money, or that of our friends and neighbors that are putting money in the same bank, is always going to be higher than what they're giving us in interest, right? So if we look at all those examples, a 7% mortgage, 8% car loan, 12% debt consolidation loan, or maybe they're a bank that offers their own credit card, and we see that interest rate accelerate up to in the 30s or something percent interest. It's not favorable for us, right? So if I were to ask you, Jeff, I know it's a loaded question, but if you place yourself in that equation as either the depositor or the bank, financially speaking, which party would you rather be?
I mean, at first glance, you think, well, it'd be nice because I'd have $100,000 in the bank, so that doesn't sound too bad. But when you start talking about the rest of what you're saying, where I'm having to make all these loans and payments, I would obviously want to be the bank, because the bank is having all that money go in and out, and I'm gaining interest off of what, 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of loans. So that sounds pretty good to me. How do I do that?
And all at a higher rate, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yep.
So really all of what we're talking about today boils down to one simple move in your life. And that one simple move is, instead of the bank being in the middle, you put yourself in place of the bank. That's really all it boils down to. So when we talk about private banking, we teach you to become the bank.
Yep. And it doesn't mean go buy a brick and mortar business. It means it's a strategy, not a. I know a couple of people that I talked to are like, so you got to actually start a business? No, not that. We'll get into it.
So picture yourself in the middle of that equation, rather than Wells Fargo or US Bank or whatever, right? Where you have some kind of capitalization of the bank, but then from that point forward, you're operating in that manner that you've been used to them operating in. So, that can look like this example where, there's the financial instrument, the bank is capitalized, and then that money can go towards a couple of things, really. Most of what we've been talking about so far is debt in the form of purchases of, vehicles, mortgages, that type of thing. But gosh, Jeff, is there there may be even another option that we could use those for assets that would create cash flow and be able to pay back the loan out of the proceeds? And maybe there may be some of you that are experiencing a minor mind-blowing scenario right there, that not only could you use that money for what we're used to and just making purchases, but you could also use that for an asset. In either one of those cases, we pay back our own bank account, if you will, with principal and interest at a rate greater than, in that previous example, greater than what loaning out to ourselves or whatever. And so we create growth in our own private bank in much the same way that a U.S. bank or Wells Fargo is, by recirculating our own money back to us in the form of a loan.
Yep. And I always tell people, with a financial instrument here that is in the upper left corner, we're going to get into what that financial instrument actually is, so but most of us, I tell people, we should all be saving a percentage of our income. So if you are, like a couple slides back, a saver, the money that you're saving, or the money that is above and beyond what you need to meet your monthly needs or annual needs, or however you break it down, that is what we're using to fund this financial instrument, which becomes then a private bank.
Yep.
Through a loan scenario that we'll get into the nuts and bolts in a few minutes. But yeah, you can basically, and this is where we started with it, Jeff, was we had a lot of debt after our accident. And when we first found out about this, we were actually encouraged to go, not only just our savings, but we were encouraged to take, as much money that we had free to funnel into this, because the more that we could fund our financial instrument with off the bat, the more that we could actually do. This is so cool. Turn your liabilities into your assets. It makes your debt something that you can keep in your family forever, because when you're paying yourself back, I always hated looking at debt or credit card debt or student loan debt is money that I had to earn through my job, enough to pay those monthly or however it was going to get paid off. And that was money that I would never, ever see again, ever. And I had to work all that time, it could be years of work just to trade enough time for money to pay off that debt. Whereas in this scenario, if I'm borrowing the money from myself to pay the debt and I'm making the payments back to me, my debt just got shifted. If you know about accounting, a liability is a debt and an asset is something that adds to your net worth. That changes the whole paradigm. Now I can say, okay, yeah, I got to make this money to pay off my debt. But if I do it in the way we're teaching here, where you put it into a financial instrument and then borrow against that money in there for yourself, you just now are increasing your net worth and increasing your wealth just by paying off debt. And we'll show example here in a little bit about some actual numbers of that. But that's where we started, is we knocked down some debt because we would have anyway with the money, but that money would have been gone forever. We would have never been able to use that money again. By doing it this way, that money that we first funded the financial instrument with is always going to be there. And then we can start our private bank, and it allows us to make the principal and interest payments on the loan we use to pay off the debt back to ourselves with, when you take a loan, future money that you make has to pay that loan back. And we're just doing it back to ourselves. We're just changing the flow of money. And like you said, it's just one move different. And this is what we're doing. We're setting it up so that you have the ability to control the flow of money and give your money more than give it multiple jobs at one time. So that's where we started. And I have a business. I'm sure many of you that are watching this or will watch this have, an entrepreneur venture or a small business or something where you need to buy things. If you have equipment, you need to go get more training, or you have, a variety of things. You could consider that an asset. So you can use the same thing. Oh, I need to buy a piece of equipment for my business. I need to buy a backhoe, or I need to buy, a drill press or whatever, your business is. You can borrow the money from yourself and then go buy that and then make those payments back. So not only does the business get a business deduction, you on the personal side are getting the business to pay you back, and it's actually adding to your net worth. And we're going to get into some more numbers, but yeah, there's a variety of ways that you can use this. You can use this to go on vacation. You can use this to buy cars. You can use this to, finance landscaping at your house or a remodel at your house, or there's just endless ways that you can use this because you're just using money. So it doesn't change. It's just using it strategically and thinking about things a little bit differently, and how I can make a move and spend money and have it in this path and flow of money versus the way we've always been taught, which is You're just, either borrowing and then the money you're paying it back with is gone, or you're saving the money and whatever you purchase, the money's gone. Here, we're showing you the way that the money doesn't have to be gone. So,
Yep.
You want to run through, one of the many examples that we can go through here?
Yeah, so we do talk about cars quite a bit just because that's kind of a mid-range financial purchase that we'll all make, right, in one form or another. So if we look at this, and we'll revisit this again here a little bit later, but if we look at a $25,000 loan for a car, right, not atypical certainly in today's environment. I've been amazed at some of the vehicle prices that have grown over the last 20 years to be more than the cost of some houses now, and they plan to replace those every 5 years. But anyway, that's a separate topic. So if we took a look at a $25,000 loan, we get a typical 5-year, 60-month payback on that, paying back $500 a month, and so the total that we pay back is $30,000. The extra $5,000 being the interest that we paid the bank. And the example that I talked about with my dad earlier, when we drove by that car lot, and went back to take a look at it, decided we wanted it, then this process begins, right? We have to qualify for a loan. So means of that is through them doing a credit report check, making sure that, we're going to be responsible with their money and be able to pay it back. And so there's an approval process just to get that money to take the loan in the first place, right? And I know a lot of people that unfortunately in some circumstances due to their own mistakes or faults or whatever, and in a lot of cases not, a lot of people find themselves really stuck at this place where that step alone is prohibitive in this process. I know people, that are making entire businesses of just helping people repair credit, because this can be a prohibitive thing, right? But let's say that we pass that step and we're able to, show that we've got appropriate credit and we have the ability to pay back that loan. Then other steps in that process, or things that surround that process, I guess, is, once we do get the loan and we begin that, that you don't own that car until you make your final payment, right? Because at any point during that process, if you get into a situation where you're unable to, you'll find out that that's not your car yet. And in the event that everything, works well and works the way that it's supposed to, even if you do get the car, you pay it all back, as Jeff alluded to here on the last couple of slides, that $30,000 is gone forever. If we never think of another dime beyond this one example, what kind of power would $30,000 have in the course of your family history if you could employ it over and over again, rather than making one purchase in which it's gone forever? So let that percolate a little bit back there as we move on here. But then if you're unable to make the payments, there's potential negative consequences. You can read there: late penalties, repossession, credit report, tanking, all that kind of thing that could take place in the event that you don't have the ability to pay any longer, right? But if we move on to basically that same example, but utilizing private banking where you now are your own bank, the scenario looks the same. You're taking the same size loan, same time period to pay it back, same payment, same amount of interest. But one key difference here, that this right here could be the single biggest reason that some people would want to do this. Because I know some of the people that have bad credit aren't necessarily in a spot where they are in a lack of money scenario, right? They may have the money, but they don't have the credit. So this right here could be the sole reason that you initiate this process, is to not be told no ever again by a bank because of your credit. So there will be no credit report necessary. You approve yourself for the loan. So you empower yourself to be in charge of that decision from now on. Because you essentially are a cash customer at that point. You now own it when you drive off the lot. So if you experience a time where it becomes harder to pay back the loan, you are in a position where you're empowered to make the decision of how and when you pay that back. And then again, one of our key things that we want to express throughout this whole webinar is that you get that money back because you're paying it back to yourself. So the difference between those scenarios is a large financial difference. And especially when you think about the process, that this process will be repeated over the course of your life. You know, I'd have to stop and, you know, use my fingers to figure out how many cars we've had between the two of us in our 20 years together, you know, in our marriage. And a lot of people, you know, go through cars pretty quickly. So if you think about this process over and over again over the course of your life, it can make a pretty significant difference, and it will make a pretty significant difference in your life just by the money that you're recapturing by paying it back to yourself instead of the bank.
Yep. And I think this is such a, this took me a long time to wrap my mind around this part of it when I first learned about this a couple of years ago. And then, you know, the more you think about it, there's so many scenarios that we could discuss that if you could just have back, you know, the money from, like you're saying, the different cars you've bought or any of the things that you've loaned that may not be big money like a mortgage, but are just smaller amounts of cash. You know, even you buy a $5,000 car. Would you like to still have the $5,000?
And the car?
You know, and the car? Yeah, exactly. Just by changing the flow of money. I mean, how would your financial situation and what would your life be different just if you picked one thing that you loan on a regular basis and recaptured that money? How much would that alleviate the stress? How much would, in a time like this with the coronavirus, how would that change the uncertainty that you're going through? If you had, just in this example, you know, a $55,000 difference, money that normally would be gone is $30,000 over 5 years. And in that same 5-year period, you implemented this strategy and changed the flow of money in your life where you actually have the 30,000 still there, plus the extra 25 because of what you recaptured. That could be the difference. You know, a lot of people don't need huge amounts of money to feel the weight of financial pressure lifted from them. This one move alone right here, just one car, could mean the difference between people feeling just totally suffocated by money and like they're never going to get out and feeling hopelessness. And like you said, and I use the word too, you hate money, to feeling like, you know, you're a master at money. If you can now change the flow of it and do nothing different in your life, you're still making money, you're still spending money, but it's just in changing how things go that has a big difference in the end result for you that can just change everything. I mean, I think I've bought probably 7 or 8 cars in my lifetime. And a couple of them were, you know, almost new or new. It's like, that'd be pretty nice to have, you know, the lease payments back or different things, or all the equipment that I bought in my landscaping business. Can you imagine if I had implemented this 20 years ago when I was 13 years old, all the, you know, $10,000, $15,000 lawnmowers and all the different stuff, you know, what that would do for somebody's business. And it's like, that is so revolutionary. You know, that's why we're excited about this and are implementing it, because this is what it's doing for our family. And it's nothing complex. It's nothing risky. It's just simply a process that you can implement that changes the flow of where money goes.
So I think it'd be actually a good exercise, and I don't want to have a bunch of dead time here on the webinar, but for those of you watching, whether you're watching live or watching the recording later, I think, you know, it would be good to actually kind of just take a brief mental pause here. And if you're watching it later as a recorder, just pause the video for a second and reflect on those things that you have spent over the last, you know, 5, 10, 20, 30 years in examples like this, and ask yourself, what would the value of being your own, you know, having your own private bank, being your own private banker, what would the financial value of that have been to you? And so we'll move on here in the live version, but I think that's a good question to just let roll around up here a little bit, is how much would I have been willing to pay essentially to not have all of that money disappear from my life forever and be able to recapture it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think, you know, the whole idea here is being able to recapture. And it's like, if you didn't have to let all that money go through your hands, you just be in such a different position now with, could be all kinds of different things. And, if you could start this from, when you first got married or different things like that, like you could just be totally different. And there's different ways that, we're going to talk about really much of it today, but, you can get more efficient with your money. And like, here's a quick strategy. Your insurance payments, whether it's your car, your home, or wherever your insurance, a lot of times you're taking
Yep.
I think some of mine have been $12 to $20 per month of an installment fee on my insurance. Well, if you could just pay that up front for the year, you automatically save, potentially $100 or a couple $100. And if you calculate that as interest, they're not telling you it's interest, but it's essentially an upcharge for the exact same amount of coverage. There's ways to get more efficient with your money that save you money. And that's one strategy. But this goes so far beyond that of just teaching you how to recapture the money by changing the flow of it. And it's so cool.
So let me also add that I understand because Jeff, I don't know if you felt this way, but the little exercise that I just encouraged everybody to go through, as I've thought about that a little myself, and you may have experienced the same, that may bring maybe even some negative feelings like, man, I wish, but unfortunately the past is the past and all that money's gone and there's nothing I can do about it. And that could leave you feeling in a bad place, right? If you go through that exercise and put some mental energy towards that. I also want to encourage you not to linger in that space. So if it does cause that reaction in you, that's okay. You can acknowledge that, but then move on to thinking, how many years and how many purchases do I have ahead of me yet? And even if you're somebody that's on the later side of life and you're watching this and you can't answer that with an optimistic energy, look at those that do have that whole space of life ahead of them and think about how you can help put them in that position where they don't have to be looking at 20, 30 or 40 years later saying, I wish. So we can empower that next generation to have these options in this philosophy from the get-go.
Absolutely. So let's get into a little bit about what is the instrument that we're talking about that we use to be able to do this private banking and change the flow of money. Well, it's actually an instrument that you and I both heard about. We both used them, but we were, like we said earlier, we're given a certain set of options. And in this case, the options are right in front of us, but very few people know the entirety of those options and how to use them to their fullest potential. And so this instrument that we're going to describe and get into a little bit about how it works is actually something that's been around for 200 years. So when you think about most of the advice that we're given financially now, it's 401ks, mutual funds, index fund in the stock market, which follows the S&P 500. Just those are some general things. A lot of those haven't actually been around all that long. They've only been around, I think, some of them 30, 40, 50 years. Yep. This is something that we're talking about that I think back 200 years, Jeff. That means that all of my ancestors hadn't come to America yet. It's a long time ago. And what was the world like back then? And this instrument has actually been around that long, which means that every major crisis that we've gone through, whether it's coronavirus now to the Great Depression, the world wars, different other economic issues of recessions or like terror attacks at 9/11, this financial instrument has remained intact, has remained solid, has been able to go through those things without a government bailout, without, having to file for bankruptcy or be purchased by somebody else. Not that these individual companies may have done that, but as the industry as a whole has been rock solid. And so what is it that we're going to talk about? And I'm going to preface this with whatever you think when I show you what this is, whatever first thoughts come to your mind, dismiss those because we're going to give you some further information. So we're talking actually about an overfunded permanent whole life insurance policy. And the many people that I've talked to when I first learned this information, some of them were in insurance, some of them knew about insurance. They're like, whoa, hold on, time out. So whatever you think you know about whole permanent insurance, just put that on pause for right now. And we're getting this, and remember what I said. This is something that very, very few agents know even exists and how to use a policy in the manner we're sharing today. And I know this because several people I know personally have been doing this kind of work. You are one of them, Jeff. What was the discussion like, Jeff, when I first told you about this a couple years ago after I went to the seminar? You were one of the first people I was super excited to tell about this. What was your initial reaction?
If I would take the half an hour to scroll back through our text history from over the last couple of years and find my actual reaction, I think it would probably be one that would align with probably what some of our listeners are experiencing right now.
Right.
Because I actually used to sell life insurance, right? And the organization that I was with, we had nothing to do with whole life insurance, and we're very vocal against it. And so, this was as I began my learning process, or relearning process, maybe better said, about this whole arena. This was my first initial big hangup was right here. And so those of you that can relate to that right now, I understand. Been there, felt that. But the truth is that as we can educate and as you learn and see the application of what we're talking about, it's very easy to see how this is the perfect instrument for this and why.
Yep, exactly. And I always tell people as well, if a 401k allowed you to do what we're talking about here, we would use that. If there's other financial instruments that allowed you to do this, we would use them. We're not life insurance salesmen.
Right.
That's not our point. We're here to share a concept that we know, we use, and this just happens to be the mode that allows you to do it. So let's get into a little bit how it's different, how it works. Not to bore you with details, but just a few highlights. So one of the main differences is these have a high cash value. And at the very beginning of a policy, there's ways to structure them that most agents don't know that allow you to have a high cash value at the very beginning. With, I think, most whole life insurance policies, there's a guaranteed return. It's written into the contract. So if you put money into them, you know exactly how much money you're getting back out. There's no volatility. There's no risk from like the stock market. If the stock market goes down, this goes down. It's a guaranteed return. It's a contractual agreement. It also does give bears dividends. It's not a guarantee, but I think 140 years straight that they've produced a dividend. So the next step down from a guarantee. These are permanent. So once you have one in place, it can't go away unless, of course, you don't make the payments. That's the only way it would go away. But the policy itself does not change or end a term limit or anything like that. It is protected. So because it's an actual agreement between you and the insurance carrier, it is actually asset protected. So the money that's in there can't be touched by bankruptcy, divorce, any type of thing. The money that's in there is protected. So it's actually a form of asset protection, which is one of the many ways we reuse our money more than once, because the money you're using to fund your policy to start a private bank is also asset protected. And this is why the wealthy go to these, is because it does allow them to do multiple tasks with the same amount of money or the same exact money that's put into one of these. It does asset protect them, where they don't have to go to an attorney and have a whole other structure to protect their money. They can do it all inside of this, all while getting the benefits of the guaranteed growth and getting the ability to recapture principal and interest through their private bank by purchases and loans and things like that we've already discussed. So this is one of the many ways that we're reusing our money more than once and multi-purposing it. And one of the really cool things is the money that you're funding a life insurance policy with, you've already paid taxes on it. So it's tax-free growth because everything in there is already been paid taxes on. So the growth is tax-free, and it also goes to heirs tax-free, the beneficiary in your death benefit, because that is still written into that. And we only use A+ rated mutual life insurance companies, and mutual meaning that all of the policy owners are mutual owners in the company. So everybody that has a policy is actually a part owner of the company. And so they have our best interest at heart when it's a company structured like that. So anything you want to add about this, Jeff?
So, from my experience in the past and my short wall they got put up when this was first introduced to me, what some of you may be thinking right now, is still about the vehicle. And let me assure you that most agents and most companies either want, because the question roll around in my mind, so can I just go to my car insurance company or whatever and ask them to set up a private bank for me? Most places are either A, not going to be aware of how to do this, two, not be able to because they're not set up properly. Like Jeff just mentioned, most companies are not mutual life insurance companies. They're stock. So their agreement is to their stockholders rather than their policyholders, which plays a big part when it comes to the dividends. But then three, even if they do know about it and they are able to, probably most would not be willing to. And the reason that whole life kind of generally gets a bad rap is that it's sold with the agent's best interest in mind most of the time, and that they sell it in a way that lines their pockets the best. And again, this is not a reflection on any agent or even any companies, but it is the way that the industry works. It just is. And so we structure them in the way that is best for the client and their needs, and that plays a big difference in the way that this whole private banking process is set up.
Absolutely, good stuff. So let's go on to a couple more things here. So when we're talking about how the policies are structured, there's really three components to it. There's the person that owns the policy. So in our personal case, I'm the owner of our policy. There's the insured, and it's the person the policy is covering their life value, essentially. And in our case, I own it and it's covering me because I'm the primary breadwinner at the moment. And there is ability to do insurable interest on somebody. If you're wanting to structure one of these and you don't have a spouse or a business partner, you can do a policy like this on somebody that you have an insurable interest in. So if that applies, get into that another time. But then there's the beneficiary, which is the person that has the life insurance policy on them. They name a beneficiary, which could be children, it could be a spouse. So when that person passes, the death benefit passes on to the beneficiary tax-free. So those are just the three components to it that you need to know about. So let's get into a little bit. This is a much more detailed illustration about how we gave the example earlier about a $25,000 car. And this is showing you by a lot more numbers. Now, I don't want your eyes to glaze over or you to go, shut down on me. Let's just focus on a few of the columns and a couple of the rows. And I want to point out a few things and show you how the flow of money works with more specificity, and show you over time how this is a long-term strategy that will definitely have positive benefits in your life and can potentially grow your wealth and all those things. So the basis here is this is a actual illustration and flow chart, or not flow chart, but a Excel chart of a 41-year-old female that is buying a $25,000 car every 5 years, paying 7.4% interest. So let's run through. If you look at the first column, year one, age 41, the premium deposit, that's the first green column, is $25,000. So she has essentially saved up $25,000 and she wants to start a private banking program with this life insurance policy. So she puts in $25,000 that first year. The available cash value that year, if you go over to the second green column, is about $14,500. So what she actually does is at the beginning of the second year, so this is month 13, she makes her second year's premium deposit, which means she's saved up, another $25,000. She puts that in. Year two, she has the ability then with cash available in the policy, because with the policy, some money goes to actually fund the whole life insurance policy, and the rest of it is what's called a paid up addition. And that is what is the high cash value at the front end. And that's one of the things that has to be written very specifically in order to allow you to be able to do this. So by the 13th month, if you go to the first blue column, it says car loans. She actually, with the first 2 years of premium deposits, took a loan out for $25,000 and bought her first car. And this is what Jeff went over earlier. And she made loan payments back to herself of $500 a month, which is $6,000 for the year. And that is allowing her to recapture the principal and interest that would normally be going to Chrysler Capital or Ford Credit or whoever. That's staying back in her and her family. And so if you go over on year 2, that first dark gray highlighted row, I want you to go over to, I got to move something here on my screen. Banking, it's the third green column, private banking concepts accumulated net result. So this takes into account, I have to pay for the policy and the benefit I'm getting back out of the policy. So in the first couple of years, you're actually behind. And this is a long-term strategy. This isn't about you're going to get wealthy year 1 or 2. This is about changing the flow of money. And in the beginning, you do put more into it than you're going to get back out. But as we're going to show you, by year 5, year 25, the numbers start really going in your favor, and you're going to see that. So, excuse me. So if you go over to these, excuse me, goodness. Go over to the green column after that on the right, it says normal car loan result. So typically, when you make monthly payments of $500, that's $6,000 every year that you'll never, ever see again. Jeff already touched on that. The column to the right of that, private banking concepts versus conventional. Conventional just meaning a conventional loan. You're making that $6,000 a year in monthly payments you'll never see again. When you compare a private banking concept program versus normally doing it, that column right there is beginning to show you the overall effect of the money that it takes to fund the policy, the money that you're putting in for the paid up addition to be able to give you the benefit of taking a loan, plus adding in the money that you're beginning to recapture. That money, and actually I'll make another comment, when you do take a loan from your insurance policy, it's actually not a loan against from, I want to make sure I'm using the right verbiage, it's actually a loan against. Your life insurance is actually collateral, and they will loan against the cash value. And that's how the private banking mechanism works inside the policy, is you have the ability to have the policy working all the time. So the money you stick in there is growing at a guaranteed rate of 4%, which doesn't sound like much, but it's actually tax-free. So that makes it more like 6, but it's guaranteed. There's never a dip. There's never a down year. There's never a bad month. It's continuous, uninterrupted. So that's going on all the while you're being able to recapture your, in this example, monthly car payment. So that column is factoring in all the flow of money in and out, the money to fund it and the money to flow back into your life by recapturing it. So as you can see, by the first, the second year there, you're still behind a little over $9,000. But then if we jump down to year 5, which is that second, like kind of dark gray highlighted background, you can see that number in that private banking concepts versus conventional column jumps to 112,000. So that means if we go back to the left across that chart in year 5 on that line, we've actually got available cash value of 113,000 that, from the money that we've put in. Because if you factor in, we've actually put in a total of $125,000 of premium deposits through those first 5 years, and the cash available is actually 113,000. So we're almost at a break-even point, even in year 5, of the money that we're putting into it. We're actually able to get borrow against almost 100% of that by year 5. And if you scroll down to, I think it's year 8, the cumulative deposits become 155,000, and the available cash value is 158,000. So in year 7 or 8 is usually when we see most people kind of make that tip over from the money you've put into it to get it going versus the benefit you're getting on the backside of being able to recapture principal and interest on purchases, loans, debts. assets, all that stuff starts to really tip in your favor. So if we were to continue, and I didn't highlight this, but in year 8, if we go across that row, accumulated banking concepts, accumulated net result. So it's the third green column. The net result there is we're $148,000 ahead of the game. The column to the right of that, a normal car loan result, you would actually be negative $42,000. So that's a swing of $90,000 right there. That confirms it in the next row over, or the next column over, private banking concepts versus conventional. But what becomes interesting is if you look at your death benefit, the way that most whole life policies are written, if it's just by a traditional whole life insurance or just a life insurance agent selling you a typical policy, they're going to ask you, how much do you make in a year? Is that going to go up over time? How many more working years do you have left? And they're going to calculate, okay, you make $50,000 a year. You're going to be alive for 20 more years. You need $1 million death benefit policy. That's the way they work. That's the way those are structured. That's the way they work. And it's a static death benefit. It never changes. With these, because we're writing them from a different perspective for a whole different reason to get you a whole different result, the death benefit actually goes up every single year, which is really cool. So by year 8, if we scroll that column, in the purple column is the death benefit. That's 1.2 million. And we started with under $1 million. So just in 8 years, we've already gained, what, 200 and
$250,000.
Yeah, another $250,000. It went up just because the policy is working on its own. There's a guaranteed growth and all that. So that's one of the benefits. So let's scroll down to year 25, which is further down this graph or the chart, is the next dark gray highlighted. One thing I haven't mentioned is by year 6, your policy premium deposits actually go down by 60% because the paid up addition falls off. So you're actually needing to put less in to keep it going at the same speed essentially. But so by then we can see that we've accumulated over those first 25 years, we've actually put into the policy $327,000 in those 25 years of premium deposits. We go over to the second green column in the row of the 25th year. The available cash value is $587,000. So we're actually ahead of the amount of money we've put in to fund the policy by what, $250,000, $260,000, which is pretty amazing. And we go over to the third green column, which is private banking concepts net accumulated result. And that is almost the same exact dollar amount, $577,000. But in the column just to the right of that, if we would have bought, we're on car number 1, 2, 3, 4. We've bought 5 cars by year 25. That would normally be $144,000 gone forever. You would never ever see those payments again. The car company's never going to give you those payments back. You're never going to see them again. So it's really a net swing of $721,000 just by changing the flow of money on 5 car purchases. And that's profound. And then the death benefit that year is almost 1.5 million, just under. It's a little bit hard to see. I should have picked a different color there. Looked better on my computer screen last night, but and let's go down to, oops, let me go back one. Hang on. Let's go to when I did print screen on this, I didn't get rid of that. So the very last one I was going to do at year when she's age 77, which would have been after she had purchased all of her cars. We can kind of see the private banking concepts versus conventional. So this is in that very bottom dark gray row. In the very last green column is $1.3 million that she is ahead of the game just by funding 5 car purchases. Well, 7, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, 7 car purchases over a 25-year period of time. Nets in her pocket, money that she still has that she would no longer not have in any other scenario. It's $1.3 million with a death benefit of almost $1.9 million. It will transfer to her heirs. So I know a lot of numbers, might be a little overwhelming and confusing. I understand it was for me in the beginning, but this is just to show you monetarily the flow of money There's no games being played with these numbers. These are straight up numbers that take into account all facets of all the money moving in and out. And this is what you get. So this is, you know, the numbers behind the long-term principles here of how recapturing money, reusing money more than one time, giving it multiple jobs can really have a dramatic effect on your ability to grow wealth and, you know, change your family forever, change the scope of your business, change the scope of your purpose and passion. Because even if you just recaptured all of your vehicles and after, you know, a few years, you have an extra $100,000 at your disposal to fund your purpose and your passion, what could you do with that? I know the few people that I've asked that are business owners, a couple of them are in the natural health field. It's like, what could you do? How many more people could you help with an extra $100,000? You didn't have to go make that money. You're just changing the flow of that money in your life. And, you know, they're like, it'd be life-changing. Absolutely, it'd be life-changing. So that's what we're really sharing here. Do you have any other thoughts or comments on all these numbers here, Jeff?
No, I think you did a great job of going through that. Yeah, and again, this is part of the reason you get to see it now in monetary form. But when I asked a few slides back to just kind of ponder a minute what that would be worth to you financially, this is where the rubber meets the road, like, right? I mean, we follow that cumulative deposits column down. You can see literally what it cost her to capitalize her own bank and do this, right? And relative to those numbers in that first cumulative deposits column, you know, follow that over to the difference that it's had. Not to mention, like you said, Jeff, in year 37, when she's 77, she's got an extra $1 million that she'll be passing along to her family. It's, you know, there's no way really that you can look at this and say, if financially speaking, that it's not a value to do this. And again, you know, this is simply an example of using it for one thing a handful of times. So, you know, if this were utilized over the course of somebody's entire life and you had multiple things running through this, or starting multiple policies to where you're playing full on with this, so to speak, the financial difference between, you know, the cost or the investment of doing this and the benefit gained from it just becomes a very large disparity in the favor of the benefits gained. So
yep.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking, what if, you know, like we've got a little bit younger children than you do, Jeff, but if we had learned this, you know, early enough on, like when we first got married, both of us, and you could start a policy, even say on your children, and use this for their benefit. Every time they wanted to buy a new bicycle or rollerblades or a super soaker or a Nerf gun, even basic stuff in the beginning, and you accumulated that money and you did it on as their toys and the things that they needed in life go up in price, you started recapturing all that stuff. By the time they hit college, you'd have enough money built up in cash value. You could essentially borrow the money from your private bank to pay for their college. And as they go out into the working world, hopefully in alignment with their purpose and their passion, and start generating more money, they're paying themselves back. Their college education just profited them and their children.
Yep.
You know, it's totally different. And, you know, I was thinking another example is one of the few authors that write about this. One is Garrett Gunderson, and I talk about him quite a bit. He's one of my very favorite people on the financial topic. He's a very energetic, passionate guy around money. And he talks about early on when he did this back in the late 90s, this exact philosophy, he actually started using it to recapture all of his insurance costs. So you fund your private bank, you take a loan out and make your insurance payments for the year on your house, your car, you know, whatever else you have. And then you just pay yourself back throughout the year. You essentially are now getting insurance, not really for free, but it's not costing you anything. And it's adding to your wealth, just like in this example here where we're doing it with a car. You can do it on anything. You can go on a $2,500 cruise to the Caribbean borrow the money from yourself to go over the next 12 months, make your payments back with interest that you would normally get if it was a credit card that you made that trip on, and pay yourself back even more interest like a credit card would charge you at maybe 10 or 15%. And you might have $3,000 or $3,500 at the end of 12 months to go on next year's cruise. Instead of going on a 3-day cruise, you can go on a 5-day cruise because you've got more money now. And it didn't cost you anything net. It's a net gain. And so
Right.
like every year you could go on a nicer, longer vacation just because you're recapturing the money. It's you can apply it in any way, you know, in any part of life. And obviously the more you start with on the front end, the bigger your insurance policy and the private banking program starts with, the more things you can fund. For people like you and I, Jeff, we had to start on the smaller side. But for those that have a business with high cash flow, I know many, you know, natural healers and doctors and stuff like that that make well into the 6 figures. It's a lot of cash flow. All you have to do is capture the money for just a month or two, long enough to get this going, and you can start recapturing a higher percentage of what those people are saving and wanting to do something strategic with it in a form like this to really maximize, you know, their end game. Some of those, you know, we don't usually share these examples except for if we're doing a presentation in front of them, but you start throwing around some of their numbers and the numbers in the death benefit column and the difference between a private banking method of doing this and the conventional way, the numbers start getting beyond even what you and I can comprehend a little bit. I mean, it starts
Right.
even with somebody that's just making like upper middle class money by recapturing. I mean, can you imagine instead of recapturing a $25,000 car, you recapture a BMW 7 Series, it's a $100,000 car? I mean, the numbers start
Right.
getting out of hand a little quick, you know, and then you got another problem on your hands of what do I do with all this money? You know, that's probably the webinar we'll have to cover at a later date. But, you know, that's how this can get used no matter who you are, what you do, your starting point. This is scalable, it's flexible, it can be sized to any starting point, and as big as you can dream and as big as you want to go, this will work behind it, because there are people that take out very, very large policies because they have that kind of, you know, money or cash flow in their life. So let's now we've gone through that, if you guys do have any questions about any of this stuff, you know, feel free to message us on the post or send us a private message. We'd be happy to answer those about how all this works, and we'll get into a little bit more of that. You want to go into what somebody's gone through this, Jeff, they've kind of got their interest peaked. What's the next step for somebody that would want to know, like, okay, that sounds really cool, but here's my situation, how would that look for me? And we get asked that question, how would we help somebody in that regard?
Yeah. So again, one of the differences I think between what you might find, you know, if you're going to buy a policy simply for the intent of a death benefit, and what we're teaching here versus private banking or in private banking is that we want to make this very customer centric. So what we will go through with you is what we call a financial freedom analysis. And so we'll take a snapshot of your current financial situation and log, you know, basically where you're at now, and pair that information with an illustration for your policy. And we will actually tailor it to what your needs and desires are. So you know, for a lot of the people, like we were talking about when we were talking about the borrower versus saver, a lot of people, you know, have grown up in that borrower mentality, and so likely are in the midst of payments, and on that, you know, ladder scale where they're paying themselves back up to even. So likely, you know, we'll on the left there, we've got a creditor section. So likely we'll be logging, you know, what your debts are, and we will implement and merge this information to create the best case scenario for your benefit in using your private bank to recapture in the way that makes the most sense for you. And if you are somebody, I actually have a potential client right now that, you know, they've grown up in the saver space. And so they're saying, well, you know, we don't really have any debt. You know, we've saved up and paid cash for everything. then what we may do is utilize this a little bit differently to look at some potential options of, what type of assets we could use that private bank of yours to fund that would enhance it even at a greater level. Because those that can play at that level where it's not just paying off debt and trying to recapture some of what's being lost right now, if it's actually buying assets that can provide extra cash flow and provide a greater return for your private bank, that's the level that we want to play at ideally and ultimately. So again, it'll be centric to what your needs and what your desires are for a private banking scenario for you and your family. So this is one example of somebody that got helped, that had a handful of credit cards. Everything across here, as you read it, is all credit cards. And without going into a ton of detail on it, just kind of details out what her current scenario was, what she was currently spending. And then we put together a game plan of how to attack that. So we'll actually give you a plan that's in writing in black and white that, in this month of this year, make this payment to this, and this. And in this case, she utilized pulling some, well, she didn't pull the money out. She took a loan against the money. Good clarification earlier, Jeff. She took a loan against her cash value in her policy, utilized those loan proceeds to pay down the debt. So actually had the first two paid off within the first month and a large chunk paid against that third one. And basically just repeated that in her case, a couple times a year. And so over the course of less than a year and a half, basically, we took those 7 credit cards and wiped them all out just by utilizing her private bank to do that. So I think we've got, unless you have anything else here, Jeff, I think we've got another slide that actually kind of summarizes those results as well.
Yep. Hang on one sec. Okay. Yep.
So yeah, we took her from a situation where, had she stayed on the current path that she was on, and we know that most people that get involved heavily into credit card debt basically will never pay them off. They'll be paying on them forever because the minimum payment that we get accustomed to just gets absorbed into our budget with all the other things that we need. And so she was on a path to stay in that debt for 122 months, 10 years in her case, paying $20,000 of interest, again, all credit cards. But by utilizing her own private bank and using the funds to that to recapture this money and use it to accelerate the debt payoff and pay herself back, she had that all paid off within 17 months, which was less than a year and a half, and paid about 1/10 of the interest that she would have otherwise, not quite, but saved her, 105 months, 8 3/4 years, and almost $18,000 in interest by using her private bank to pay off her debt rather than just her normal cash flow that she's been accustomed to. So pretty powerful.
And this is somebody that I have actually known for probably close to 10 years, actually. This was actually a client of mine in one of my other businesses, and she is the friend of my accountant that told me about all that we're sharing with you today. So I've known her very well, very personally for a long period of time. And I can tell you in her actual scenario, she got everything paid off quicker because she made the decision in her mind to get out of debt. And she was getting up towards the retirement age. And I know I can share this with you because she's given us permission. And when she made that intention to get things paid off, she actually started making more money in her business than she'd made, I think, ever, if I remember right. So just making a decision to do something like this and implement a strategy like this can mean other benefits for you outside of just the numbers here on, the screen as they would apply to, the individual client. There can be other things that go on that, aren't guaranteed by any means, but when you get serious about making financial changes in your life and doing better and upping your game financially, you just don't know what can happen and come your way. So I do have a couple questions for you though, Jeff. So let me go back a slide. For somebody, and some of you might be asking this or wondering this, is there a point, because it seems like, okay, I've got the money, I could just pay these credit cards off. Why would I want to put it into a banking program first? So that's question one. And then question two, is there ever a point where you would want to pay the debt off first before you started a program?
Yeah, so on the first question, hopefully you picked it up by now with us talking about it in some of the previous examples. But the main reason that you would want to fund and capitalize your bank and attack your debt via that means, rather than just paying off everything first, the impact that you're going to see there is recapturing all of that money. So if you pay it off all first and then start your program, while that we may segue into answering the second question here in a second with that, that may possibly be what you need to do in order to start capitalizing your bank if you don't have the cash flow right now. But for the most part, if you're able to, and you're in that situation where you have that option, why would you not want to recapture that extra $20,000 of, almost $20,000 of interest for yourself, rather than continuing to pay it to the credit card companies, right? So that would be the main reason you would want to hit this first, because you can recapture that money. You can still, as evidenced in her example, have things paid off quickly. Even with having the extra funds to capitalize her bank, she still had everything paid off in less than a year and a half. So it didn't hinder her ability to pay them off quickly. She recaptured the money in the meantime. So win-win for her in that example. As far as the second question, there may be a scenario where this isn't financially viable for somebody at the get-go when they first learn about it. It may be a situation where you need to pay off some debt in order to free up the cash flow to do this. That is a possibility. In that case, one of the great things about doing that is, by starting the policy, if you paid off all your debt first, then you may be thinking, well, then maybe I don't need it as much because I've already paid off everything. It could be just the start of a guaranteed growth emergency fund for you to help prevent you from getting back into that debt situation again. And therefore, it could be well worth paying off the stuff in advance if that's a need. So.
Yep. Well, I think what we've come in contact with some people is, if there's a smaller amount of debt that they don't have too much longer to pay on, we actually run the numbers both ways. We want to know, does it make sense to pay off the debt or not before we would start a program of whatever size. So we'll actually run the numbers and find out what's the best interest of the client to know, should you pay off the debt? And it's typically, if it's a smaller, just a, maybe a $1,000 dental bill or something like that that's left, to get that paid off first before we start one. But then, I think more times than not, it makes more sense long term, maybe the first year or two, like we showed in the, a couple slides back here, in the first couple of years, it doesn't seem as advantageous. But then by the time you get towards the end, you're thinking about, oh yeah, that makes way more sense. I want to get the ball started as early as possible so that I get on the positive side of that after a year or two. And then, I'm just way money ahead after that. So let's jump into the third thing. We're not going to spend much time on this, but there's a couple things that I've gone through in my experience in the last 5 years or so that I think is valuable and you'll find important as we discuss all this, and you can kind of understand why this is such a good move, not only for you and your family right now and the here and now with the money that you're making and where that money is going, but also thinking down the line. We've talked about our kids and stuff like that a little bit. We want to talk about generational wealth a little bit and why you would want to use this to retain generational wealth so your heirs don't have to start over at zero. That's really where we want to go, because there's this, I think it's a very poor belief in society. I think it's more in America than outside of America, that we should spend all of our money before our kids die, leave them nothing, spend our last dime on our last day. Those kind of beliefs, I feel like, are very unfortunate, and we could be doing much, much better if we would implement some of these strategies. Because like I said earlier, I feel like everybody has a purpose and a passion. And if we can give the next generation, our kids or our grandkids, the ability to take their purpose and passion to a whole nother level, what would that mean for this planet? I think that could do great things. So I feel like this is not only a great idea, a great concept to help you with the money you're making and maximizing it and growing some wealth. To me, there's a far deeper, more profound reason for doing something like this. And it goes way beyond just money. It's what you can do with the money, how you can serve other people, impact other people. And this is where this really comes in. So I feel like this is a picture of my grandfather's farm. We actually live out here now. In the background, you can see the white houses. We live in the left house right now. This picture is from, I think, the 1950s. My grandfather was a third generation farmer. His grandpa came over from Germany in like the middle 1800s, I think it was. And if you look at those three generations, my great grandfather, my great grandfather, and my grandfather, all three of them were farmers. They lived in the same, yard and farmland. Their economic level didn't really change too much. My grandpa did have a couple boats and seemed to always have nice, newer cars. He always bought new cars every few years. But outside of that, they lived relatively a normal, everyday life that most people in America do. And as many of you know our story, we moved back to my grandpa's house here 3 years ago. And when we moved in, he was still alive, but he was in nursing care and was towards the end of his days, unfortunately. But it really got us looking at all of his affairs that he had legally, as far as assets and trusts and where stuff was going when he passed and all that. And it really made me realize that we could be doing so much more if we would plan things strategically. It's part of it, but the other part is having the right tools to carry out those plans. And that's where this private banking stuff comes in, is because it allows you to give your heirs a leg up and let them go up an economic level or two or three from generation to generation, because they can do so much more of an impact. And my grandpa, he was a farmer. He only thought about farming. I think more and more people now are thinking beyond their job. They're thinking about serving humanity and doing what they're called to do. I think that's much more of a popular conversation now, or stuff that our grandparents didn't talk about. They didn't talk about that stuff, but now it's a much more open conversation. I think is very relevant. And I'm kind of using the same things here, but I think as far as our family purpose goes, we don't really talk about what's the purpose of our family or get into that. A lot of people don't talk about that stuff. So why not be able to get an idea of what your purpose is as a family or individually, and then helping your kids figure that out, or helping if you own a business, your employees figure that out, and giving them the right financial tools to be able to carry out their purpose and passion. I feel like that is so needed in today's world as we go through this coronavirus. And depending on how you view decisions that have been made, I think we all can agree, no matter what side of the fence we're on, we could use more positive change in this world than we could staying with what we're doing. And one of the biggest ways that you can influence decisions is through having some extra money and having more power financially. That if you look at the people that make decisions that are on TV, I mean, you look at Bill Gates right now, he's obviously got a lot of money. He has a lot of power and influence. So I think anything we can do to strategically increase our personal economy and our personal power, our personal influence for good, we need to, jump into that and do that. So one of my mentors, I guess Jeff now qualifies as one of your mentors, Joel Bauer, he always has talked about that he feels like as a parent, the greatest gift is allowing your children to carry out their purpose. And I couldn't agree more now that I have children. And, we have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and you can see the things you're doing now, the things you teach them, how you're shaping them for what they're interested in, and you can push them towards that and encourage them like my parents did with me, or like a lot of parents, they, steer kids away from what they're called to do for whatever reason. And a lot of times it's for, what they feel is the best, but I think on a larger scale, it could be done better. So, as we transition here towards the end, thinking about generationally, and thinking about what the next steps are that somebody would want to take after they learn this information. Jeff, you want to talk a little bit about your family? I'll talk a little bit about mine. People, get to know us a little bit better and can share with them exactly what the next steps are to move forward. And we'll close out here for today.
Yeah. So this is my family, my wife Valerie, and our two sons Zach and Andrew. And it's been neat to, as you mentioned, I'm a few years ahead of you on the family scale, but it's been neat to see them begin to grow into their talents and their purpose. And so definitely, both developing their own identities and have their different passions and pursuits. And it's neat to see as a parent, and obviously do my best to help guide and shape and direct some of that. But it's neat sometimes too to just watch it happen to a degree as well. So take a step back and just see that. So I'm excited. Zach, our oldest, is just at the starting of his working stage. Just got not quite a full-time job here in the last week or two. And so, we've already begun conversations of having him start his own private bank and, funneling some of his future purchases through that. And so it's been neat to see his desire to do that, because he, I think, understands the impact that could have over the course of his life, and potentially even, generations for him. And so, yeah, it's just, it's neat to think about the different start that they're going to get. It's exciting for Valerie and I as well to see, even though we, can look back and say, I wish, there's enough life ahead as well, where we're still excited about the differences that this mindset shift and shift in practice of how we view and use our money is going to impact our lives too. So, yeah.
Cool. And Andrew's into, is it straight karate, or is it one of the?
It's Taekwondo.
Taekwondo, yep. Okay. Yep. He's big into that and doing, what belt is he at now?
So he will be testing relatively soon for his blue belt.
Okay.
So his involvement with the martial arts actually inspired me to get started here this last December as well. So sometimes our kids have an influence on us too.
Yeah. And you and Val, this is year 20 of marriage coming up, right?
Yeah, actually here in, see what's today, the 17th. So about a week and 3 months will be our 20th anniversary of marriage. So need to be able to say that we've been together that long and sustained that relationship for that period of time, but at the same time looking forward to the next 20 plus.
Yep, absolutely. I'll share a quick bit about mine. We don't have a professional photo. This was taken, at least the most recent photos haven't been professional at all. This is actually the day of our father-in-law's celebration of life service. We just took this, and that's my wife, Beth. We've been married for coming up on 7 years now in August. And then our son, he'll be 5 in August. And then our daughter, Jenna, I think she just turned 1.5, or will just turn 1.5 here in another week or so, a couple weeks. So lots of good stuff. Alex loves trains. He loves airplanes. He loves tractors, and he'll be starting, we're going to be doing homeschooling with him probably here come fall. And Jenna, she's just getting to the stage of being able to start saying some words. I finally got her to say her own name the other day for the first time, which was really cool. And
Nice.
She said Anna and Baba and all that good stuff. And I said, I think comb was another word that was new the other day. And my wife, Beth, she's doing a lot of personal work on herself right now and working on some certifications for some coaching, more spiritual coaching and that kind of thing right now. So she's really blossomed into her own endeavor and really answered her calling that life sometimes doesn't allow you to do. And she's really navigated all that very well. I'm very proud of her and the progress she's made in the last, just a very short period of time, like 6 months or so, that things really have clicked for her and she's found what she's been looking for and doing that. So I'm very proud of her. And we're happy little family here, and got a stray cat that just came up I think it was just a little bit before my father-in-law passed away last November, and that cat just had two little kittens. I don't have pictures of them, but lots going on, and lots of good stuff going on. So as you might be wondering, now that you know a little bit more about us, what would be the next step for you to know more about how this would apply to you? Because I know some of you were going to be like me or like Jeff when we first heard this information and it clicked and it was like, this is really cool. I want to put this in practice in my life. What do I do? I know when I went to the seminar a couple years ago that my accountant recommended I go to, at the end of it, they said, what questions do you have? I'm like, I don't have any questions. I want to know what I need to do. I know some of you listening to this are going to be exactly the same thing that you're going to want to know. So what are some of the things that you're going to be able to do by talking to us and understand things at a deeper level? We didn't really talk too much about the retirement aspect, but by putting money in these, the cash value that you accumulate can be a source of tax-free retirement that can supplement and go above and beyond Social Security, which I don't know if we'll be there for a whole lot longer. At the very beginning of the presentation, we talked about having security and confidence with your money. So I think now that you've seen the flow of money, how it works, I think you can probably see, depending on your situation, how, yeah, I could see if those numbers were playing out for me, even at a $5,000 car or a $15,000 car over the course of several years, I could start to turn the tides mentally and emotionally how I feel about money if you're starting there. If you're already beyond all that stuff, great. But I know for a few of you, you're probably starting similar to where Jeff and I have, and that will aid in that. And for me, this is so big. This was the answer to my question of how can I enjoy my money now and not sacrifice the retirement? And this is exactly how, because I can buy the jet ski and I can recapture the money. It's going to add to the wealth of my family just by having a toy when we get to that point. So and we've already talked about impacting your children. So if we do the next step, which is doing it like a one-on-one, where you would sit down with Jeff or I, or both of us, if you so choose, and we would just kind of get to know you, get to know what your purpose is, your passions are, what your money goals are, and your situation right now. And that would allow us to do a few things and help you discover the fastest way that you could, if you do have debt, pay that off. And like we showed you in the example, save several years or many years of payments, and then potentially thousands or hundreds of dollars in interest charges that you'd normally have to pay that you would be saving. And then depending on what your goals are, we would be able to kind of give you more of a roadmap and show you the numbers, much like we showed you some examples here of this is your money goal. This is where you want to be in 5 years financially. This is what you want to be able to fund. This is the amount of money that we would need to start a policy with. And this is the process to get there. And this is how it would work. This is the flow of money that hits you your goal. And it's kind of what I'm already saying, but even beyond just goals, but more of where you want to be for retirement, how much you want to have there. Some of you may be further along in life into your 40s or 50s and retirement's knocking on the door and you want to know what that would look like. We'll be able to map all that stuff out. Once we get to know you and your situation, we can give you the numbers and you can go from there on that. So, for those of you that are watching this live or watch the recording, there are some things that go along with this. We've kind of mentioned a couple of them. One being you can get more efficient with the money you're already spending. And we talked about, just the example of using that with the car insurance. There's other payments and other bills that we have, home, internet, satellite radio, potentially. I know we have that, a few different things that we're always spending money on. And wouldn't it be nice to be able to save potentially some money on those bills? Well, Jeff recently found out about a way that we can do that. So that is one of the bonuses that those of you that have tuned in, we want to provide you with the ability to see what we can save you. It doesn't mean switching phone plans. It doesn't mean doing anything different. It's just a actually very simple process. You can learn to save some money and you can help pay down your debt or fund a policy sooner or a larger policy sooner. Anything you want to comment on that, Jeff? I know that's something that you've recently been using and sharing with people, and that's a good way to help people financially, especially in these coronavirus times.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be the biggest thing, depending on when you're watching this. If you're watching this recording in a year or two, maybe it doesn't apply anymore as much, but especially right now in the midst of this coronavirus environment, and everything going on with that. There's no better time for being able to reduce your bills, reduce the amount that you're paying for your bills. So while we may not be able to cover all of your bills, there certainly is a handful of things that pretty much all of us have at least 2 or 3 of, that it's the odds are pretty good that we're going to be able to help save you on that. I think 80% of the time we can come up with a savings. The average for a residential is probably around $1,100 a year. So certainly nothing to sneeze at. And just speaking to my business owner friends and Jeff's business owner friends in particular, you know, if you're in a pinch right now due to this situation with the economy, due to the virus and all the stay-at-home orders and everything like that, this one bonus right here could be enough to either keep your business from going out of business. It could be enough to sustain you during these times. It could be enough that if you're okay at the moment, but you don't have the extra cash flow to fund your own private bank, it could be the means of funding your bank. I've seen numerous testimonials of business owners saving tens of thousands of dollars, or some even to the 6-figure mark or beyond, by utilizing this process. So this bonus alone could be worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to you business owners in particular.
Yep. Yeah, very powerful, and it doesn't cost the person anything. It's just a negotiation on the back end of finding better ways or better rates for the same service with the same company. Nothing changes. It's just a matter of doing a simple check and finding out how you can save. So that's definitely a very big bonus that could make a big difference for somebody. And the other one, this goes back to some of the things that I've learned from some of the leading edge doctors and thought leaders around personal development, natural health. We all have money blocks. I still have some. I'm working through some. And a lot of times our decisions that we make financially can be impacted negatively because of the financial hardships we've gone through. You get burned once, you don't want to get burned again. So you tend to think about things from the perspective of what you've experienced, and maybe you don't see things quite as clearly as you could if that wasn't etched in your mind. So with most people, we have training around money from our parents. We've heard things, we've experienced things growing up. Maybe there was, you know, money was really tight growing up. All those things affect our brain, literally our brain, and affect our decisions. So one of the things that I would like to extend to any of you that are watching this or will watch this in the future is I would like to, no cost, no charge, I would like to sit down with you over, we live close enough to each other, we can do it in person, but over a video chat, I would love to be able to go through with you, help you identify a few of your top money blocks, and then be able to show you and actually do with you. There's some very simple tools and techniques that allow you to, when you think about your money block, you're going to feel a high intensity of emotion. And we would get that on like a scale of 0 to 10. And there's going to be some emotion, a specific feeling that you feel when you think about that money block. So maybe it's money doesn't grow on trees, or you know, I'm a Christian, so I can't make that much money, or you know, I was in business and my business partner stole $100,000 from me. Whatever you've gone through, that makes you feel a certain way. When we go through these few simple steps that we can go through, the intensity of that emotion will be diminished down to next to nothing, if not completely gone. You'll have a hard time finding that emotion again. You can still have the memory of it, but the emotion behind the memory seems to be much, much, much less, if not gone. And then also the emotion you feel about that experience in the past will be different. So that's something I want to gift to you as well, because it's so important as you're doing things forward financially. You also need to fix what's going on up here. And at some point, we will probably be doing a whole webinar on that. And if you're on live, we would love to have you on, and we can do some you know, releasing of money blocks live, because it's a fun thing to do for people and realize the change that can happen relatively quickly. And then that has a positive effect on things moving forward. So those are a couple bonuses that for watching today, or if you watch this in the near future, please, you know, get a hold of us and let us know you're interested in those bonuses, because we would like to give them to you. No charge, no strings attached, no nothing. And here's how you get a hold of us. This is the email you'd want to get a hold of us at is myprivatebankingsolutions@gmail.com. And that would be the way to schedule your one-on-one strategy session so you know how this would apply in your situation. So email us that request at that email address. And if you, in the subject line, put 1-to-1 plus bonuses, and we'll know who you are, where you came from us, and you watched the webinar and you're wanting to know more, and get those free bonuses from you. And then we'll look for that and we'll get right back to you with that information. So I want to leave you with one final thought. I don't want this to be too sad, but I want it to be something that helps motivate you and understand time is precious and you just never know. Time is, an interesting thing. This is my father-in-law last fall before he passed, probably a month or two before he passed, with our two kiddos. And, in a year's time, he went from, he wasn't in super great health, but to the point where, you didn't think he'd be around for another 20 years to in less than a year, he was gone. And you just don't know. He had hopes and dreams of doing things still in his remaining time, but it got cut short. And there's so much that we can do with these types of policies for your kids, for your family, and you just don't know when your time's up. So don't put this stuff off. If this is something that you find very interesting and you want to know how this can apply in your life and you want to implement it in your life, just send us an email right now. We're not high pressure salespeople. We're not going to try to push you into something. We want to give you the information. We want to let you know how this would work. So those of you that feel like this is what I want to move forward with, you can do that. We want to assist in you getting this implemented, immediately versus putting it off and then having something happen where you don't get it put in place and you wish you would have. Because the wish you would have's can really hold you back in life. And we've already talked about that already today of, too bad we didn't know this back then. And those are the wish you would have's versus what we've done. We move forward with this information. We've learned it. We're applying it. We're seeing how it's changed our families and what our families are going to be able to do in the future. So I encourage you, just send us the email and we'll have a conversation and then we'll go at the pace that you want to go at. But I want to see you put this in your life. How do you feel about it, Jeff?
Yeah, agree completely. Unfortunately, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. And I've heard a quote recently that the difference between where you're at and where you want to be is action. So yeah, let's do what we need to do to take our lives to the next level. As Jeff said, we're not high pressure by any means. We certainly understand circumstances and lives and want to work with you to do what you can, and we will do that. And I think that would be probably one common denominator between the two of us is that we're still not, completely where we each want to be financially, but we are doing what it takes to get there. So we are taking that action, and we would hope that we can work with those of you who want to be in that same place. So.
Yep. And like I said, no matter your starting point, whether you're working out of debt or you already have a thriving company or something like that, the cool thing about this private banking program is it works wherever you're at. It doesn't mean you have to qualify at a later time or with more money. It helps you no matter your stage of life or where you're at. And that's really powerful. And I think, anybody that wants to do this, we would encourage you. If you're somebody that's on the fence and you maybe have a hard time making decisions, or you tend to procrastinate on stuff and you just want to know more, but you won't move forward with it, we probably don't want to talk to you. We want to talk to people that are serious, like I was, like you are, Jeff, that this feels right. I want you to think about how this information feels to you when you've heard it. Does it feel right to you? If it does, you're the person that needs to email us. If this is something that doesn't sound right to you, then we won't waste your time. Don't waste ours. It's not for everybody. And we want to talk to the people that are serious, committed, ready to move forward, and know that this is going to have a major impact on their family, their business, the rest of their life, and future generations. So if you're that person, you feel like, yep, this is it, we look forward to talking to you soon. So any final closing thoughts with you? If not, we'll let you guys go, and we'll look to talk to you guys later on.
Been a pleasure to just be part of this process and be able to help maybe turn on some light bulbs for all of our listeners. And just help provide some education and, the take us from the place of what we think we know that just ain't so to now we know. And as we said earlier, the only thing that helps be combined with knowledge to create power is action. So look forward to helping to apply all of the things that we've been teaching here, as Jeff mentioned, for those that are serious. And it's just been a pleasure to be on with you today. So thank you.
Cool. Yep. Thanks for joining me, Jeff. I know this is going live on my personal group, but we'll put the recording out and have access to it. So thanks for joining me. I always love doing these with you, Jeff, sharing the things that we're passionate about. And
Likewise.
we could do these every day, all day, but like you said, we're at a different stage of life too, where we're not doing this all the time yet. So we're working there and applying these principles. So I will close out with the live stream for now, and then we'll carry on. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day. We'll talk to you all soon. And if you learned something from today, or you have a cognition from today, or let us know. Comment below the video. I'd love to know what you got out of this. If there was things you learned, what you were excited about, we'd love to learn those as well. So comment below. So we'll talk to you guys later. Take care.